All right, we'll let our other guests come in as we get started. So, hi, everybody. I'm Dan Pleasure. I'm the Vice President at KGI. It's great to meet you. Thanks for joining us today, to our guests. We're excited. I appreciate one of our students, Jillian Hook, is on the call with us today. She helped us organize this project, and she also has a leadership role at KGI. So, I'll let Jillian introduce herself and give you some background.
Yeah, I am actually a graduate assistant for the advancement team. So I was able to kind of, have the outreach of knowing the alumni pretty well. And I also am president of our Students for Rare chapter of the National Organization for Rare Diseases here at KGI. So it was a really nice way to bridge the two worlds of my life together as my time comes to an end here pretty soon. And I'm really excited to hear the conversation as I am trying to go into this after I graduate in May. So I'm excited for this conversation.
Jillian, we never want to miss a chance to promote yourself. So just tell us really briefly, what are you hoping career-wise? What are the opportunities you're looking for?
Yeah, I am actually going to be moving to Charleston in May for my job at the Medical University of South Carolina. I am working in a research lab that focuses mainly on the regeneration of the heart and specifically some rare diseases in the realm of that. But ultimately, I want to gain knowledge with my job that I'm going to get and go into the realm of clinical trials for rare diseases once I get more hands-on experience.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been great to work with you, and graduation is just a month away. So a very exciting time for everybody. And now I want to turn it over to Dr. Barbara Fortini. She's our program director for the MSGDA and associate professor of genetics, director of the Center of Training in Applied Genomics. And she's one of our go-to faculty whenever we need support and help. And she's a tremendous partner. So thank you, Dr. Fortini.
Thank you, Dan, for that introduction, and thank you for the opportunity to moderate this panel. Unfortunately, we were going to have three panelists today, but one is unfortunately not available due to some logistical issues. But I think we have plenty of expertise to cover with our two guests that are here. And I'll start by first introducing Tom Lester. He is a graduate from our Master of Business and Science program in 2004. So one of the more experienced alumni that have had long careers since leaving KGI. He has devoted more than 20 years to the rare disease space. A lot of those times were at BioMarin Pharmaceuticals. But more recently, he was in project management at Audentes Therapeutics and now is a consultant and helps people get rare disease therapeutics off the ground. And so we'll hear more about that as we ask our panelists some questions. So welcome, Tom.
Happy to participate.
Excellent. And our second panelist is someone very dear to my heart, one of the MSGDA graduates from 2023, Samantha Irving. She started her career at Sarepta Therapeutics and the Tango 2 Research Foundation and has more recently moved to Madrigal Pharmaceuticals and is a strong advocate for patients and communications with our a corporate communications team, but helping to connect with patients and is also an alumnus of our rare disease chapter of NORD here at KGI. And before we get started, I just wanted to give some background for those of you who don't know. KGI is a young institution, but rare disease has been in our DNA since the very beginning. It was really spearheaded by Dr. Ian Phillips. And very early on, we started a Center for Rare Disease Therapeutics, having students work on projects trying to to get orphan drug designations filed to help advance therapeutics in the rare disease space. We have had coursework and faculty that have specialized in rare disease for many years, and we can claim the first student chapter of NORD. That was based on our campus. And so it's just such a strong part of KGI's identity. And I'm glad to see that our alumni have stayed in that space. And so I would like to start with the first question, just very broad question. I'll direct it to Tom first. Why do you work in the rare disease space? What brought you to this area of pharmaceutical science?
That sounds like two questions, and I'm happy to explain. What brought me to it and why I do it, I think, are sort of separate. Um, what brought me to it was kind of coincident. I was looking for positions. This is after undergrad, and I was looking to work in a lab, and I was looking to work close to home, and that happened to be at Harbor UCLA in Southern California, and it happened to be close to my house, and the job that I applied for happened to be working on MPS one as a disease. And since starting there, what keeps me working in rare disease, I learned starting there was that connection that you mentioned, really feeling like you have a it's very tangible to feel your impact. You do get to go to conferences, which is very unusual to go to a scientific conference that has patients and families, or go to a patient and family conference that has scientists. So the blend of those two is really special, and it helps focus everyone on the team that's working towards something. It's also a chance to discover something new a lot of the time. It's a very forefront of technology and research and development. In most cases, it's the first treatment of its kind for this kind of disease. A lot of times new technologies are used in rare disease, or there's an excitement that we could maybe get into about um, working on programs that do not have a blueprint, do not have a precedent, do not have, you have to go by the guidance, but the guidance doesn't really actually fit very well because it's so specialized and it's so new. So I think that's what keeps me doing it, is that connection and actually meeting families and seeing how much they appreciate all of us who work in the industry or work in research or work in the medical field, how much they appreciate the dedication and focus on rare disease, because they know they've met a lot of people who do not focus on it. And so to be to be able to apply all of the training we get and the expertise that we learn over time to that is really rewarding.
Awesome. Same question to you, Sam.
Yeah. I guess what brought me to it was I was originally interested in genetic counseling and then joined the MSGDA program. And then during my time at the MSGDA program, I was involved with the NORD chapter. And I think that's also what like really sparked my interest in patient advocacy and rare disease. And Dr. Bayless's scientific communications class, I think, was a real like eye opener for me, that I really enjoy the scientific communications portion of it, and like being able to really break down those complex scientific like papers and ideas and making it very easy to understand, especially for a lot of like families and patients who don't necessarily have a medical background or a science degree. And so it's all very new to them, and can be very like confusing time. And so I think just my time also with like experiencing and meeting patients through the NORD program and going to the NORD conference really, I think like made me want to be part of patient advocacy, because I could see how much of a difference and how important it was for patients to feel heard by people in the industry, and like really feeling that impact. And even through my like various roles in rare disease and now as a more broader disease space, just how grateful patients are that they have someone that's like championing for them, and they actually feel like heard, and that someone cares and is making a difference. And I think for me, what keeps me in the space is just like that connection with the patients, and really feeling like you're making a difference, and that your job has a meaning and feels good to wake up, and that you know that you're doing something good.
Thank you. Also to Sam, so how do you think patient advocacy has reshaped how rare disease research is being conducted in industry?
Well, I think in general, patients are probably like the most often underutilized experts in healthcare. I mean, they obviously know a lot more about what's going on with themselves and the disease, sometimes more than the doctors are. And I think that it has really, like we've seen in clinical trials and some of these treatments that are now coming out for rare diseases that didn't actually have a treatment before, and including these patients and their voices, and really understanding like what's important to the patient has helped accelerate, I think, approvals and treatments and giving like patients a hope and something to look forward to. So to me, having them be a part of the clinical trials has been like one of the most important things. And I think moving forward, companies are realizing that, and you having patient focus groups and really like listening to what is important to the patient and taking that back and making sure that they're including that in clinical trials and really making the patient be involved from day one.
So, Tom, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges that are still in the rare disease space for drug discovery and then making something to trials?
Hmm. Um, Raising money is probably the biggest challenge right now. I work with a lot of early stage companies who are trying to raise money. And lately, in the last 2, 3 years, I've worked a lot on AAV development products, preclinical, and raising money is real hard for AAV right now. That's one challenge. I think there's way more opportunities than challenges, honestly, because the what's what's possible has expanded quite a bit. There is that patient voice that's out there, and patients have learned from the early strong patient groups how to do it. And that all makes like the pathway through a little more familiar, even if it's not the same every time. It's, some of the steps are similar. In the end, the challenges usually with rare disease, the smaller it is, the harder it is. Just because in order to demonstrate a treatment effect, you have to know what the natural history is, and the smaller the numbers, the heterogeneity just makes it really challenging to say this is what it is. But people are coming up with ways to get around that too, or get through that. I wouldn't say get around it, it's get through it and deal with that head on and say, this is how we're approaching it, individual patient measures that are meaningful. Getting back to what Sam said, is having the patients define what's meaningful, and then you show a change in that meaningful thing. That's what it's all about. It's really helpful. But the number uh, of new companies trying to raise money, I think, just makes it to where there's competition within the rare disease, not necessarily from one product to another or from within the same disease. Sometimes that comes up, but that the talent, the money, the capabilities, the bandwidth to do clinical trials, you know, uh, each institution can only do so many at those times. So there's sometimes the peaks and valleys that you got to navigate, and it's sometimes just bandwidth.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder if you could explain a bit more about what goes into a rare disease trial, maybe compared to something we might have heard of. Let's say like a trial of a GLP-1 that's going to be used in millions of people with a very broad, complex diagnosis. How are trials different in the rare disease space?
Who's taken the reg courses? The reg statement would be there is no different standard for what the trials need to do. But the reality is, I was just recently reading FDA every year puts out a report of the last drugs that were approved last year. It's consistently half of them are on some accelerated pathway of some kind. So they're half. That's a lot. That they're either orphan, priority review, accelerated review, one of those. So there isn't just this template of what it looks like. Um, I uh, what's the difference? Usually smaller numbers, usually patients first, not healthy volunteers, although sometimes that happens. It usually means longer trials a lot of times, not always. A lot of these diseases are chronic, but not all of them. And so there's smaller numbers, longer duration, and I would say bigger effect. You're aiming for a bigger treatment effect to compensate for those small numbers and really serious disease. If I had to put it very plainly what the differences are. And a lot of rare disease products are, the program consists of 2, maybe 3 trials. Rarely are they, it's a phase 1, a phase 2, a phase 3. It's usually a phase 1, 2, maybe another phase 2, and then some pivotal study that might be a phase 3, it might be another phase 2. So it really comes to pushing the limits of that required evidence that is necessary to reasonably predict what I don't always remember the right words, but it's reasonably predict that the drug is effective and it's safe. And the fun part, or the interesting part in my mind, is usually the creativity that comes in when you're dealing with a rare disease, that you do have to think of it, what's right for this disease, for this patient group, maybe even for one aspect of a disease. It's not even always all of them. So that's a very broad answer. I think if you wanted to talk more specifically, we should go into some more specifics, because that was a very broad question.
Yeah,
but
feel free to go to
some.
Yeah, Sam too. What do you think is the big differentiator of having worked at a company that is very rare focused versus one that is very broadly focused?
I think kind of what Tom was saying is just the population, right? Rare disease, there's usually a lesser number of people than there are for broader diseases. I think also when we think of rare disease, the other tricky part is a lot of people with rare diseases tend to be pediatric patients, which also has its own complications too, and its own, like different things to consider. Whereas when you're dealing with adults, they're more willing to put themselves in clinical trials and, put themselves out there. Kind of to what Tom was saying about being creative, I know like you have to think of as rare disease patients, there's not a lot of data necessarily, and so they have to get creative. And I know that I think a couple of rare disease groups use natural history studies as some of those data points to compare, which helps. And so I think kind of that way you have to kind of get creative with what data you have, and I think the FDA is kind of coming around to that and realizing that rare disease is you can't treat it the same way that you can treat typical diseases that are more common. And so that's a good thing. At least I think we're kind of making progress there. But there's still a lot to be done. And I think one of the biggest challenges too is still like diagnosing patients, rather like doesn't matter rare disease or not. A lot of patients still go undiagnosed. And so I think that's also a bigger challenge in itself.
I'm glad you mentioned pediatric. It's so common that it's working with peds that I forget that that's uncommon.
Yeah.
As I've been working in rare disease, it's almost always when I see something that's only adults, I'm surprised. So I'm glad you brought it up. And it means that also the family perspective comes in. We often include family questionnaire or caregiver assessments along with it, which is not typical in more broad diseases usually.
I was recently at the American College of Medical Genetics meeting, and they had the keynote session was about gene therapies and just going from sort of one-offs to like making it a standard of care in the rare disease space, right? What does this future look like? And one of the issues that they brought up was, as the FDA requires larger and larger trials, that is hurting the business prospects of the companies, right? Because you've now treated all the people during the trial phase, and there are no longer any patients left to treat for profit after the trial has ended. So we don't like to talk about money so much in the rare disease space, because I think all of us share a passion about helping people live healthier lives. But most of this development is being done at for-profit companies. So can you both talk about maybe that balance between designing a strong trial that really does adequately test the safety and efficacy of a drug, and also thinking about the future market for this therapeutic if it does get approved?
Tom, I'll let you have. You can start.
I'll start. I think that one is it's actively in debate right now in the industry. I think gene therapy is still very new. Even it doesn't feel new to all of us who are on the entrepreneurial front of biotech, like in medicine, we're talking about this. So it doesn't feel that new, but there's there's not that many of them so far. Um, I also think even for me, I now have a broader definition of what gene therapy means. It used to be a pretty narrow definition, so that makes it hard to generalize also. Um, and my first blush impression is I I have seen those examples of, well, if you treat everyone. So if you're in I know some people who work on the NGLY1 gene therapy front, and they are celebrating their 10th patient enrolled in their study, and there's probably 10 patients or 12 in the US. It's really a tiny disease. And will there be a commercial success of that? I don't know. Is it important? I'm not sure. I think that's the part of the question when it gets to those individual patient or very, very, very small numbers. Um, I think a different model has to apply. When it comes to some of maybe I don't know how to describe it, but rare, but not single digit kind of rare.
Mm.
Um, I would say in those cases, if your trial has to be that big to show an effect, it's not having a big enough effect. That's my general impression. If it only increases something by this much and you need 500 patients to show that that's a statistically significant, well, then maybe a gene therapy is not good enough to justify the development. I think there's a reality check in there too. Some of these cases, gene therapy might be the only way to address some of these diseases that we know of right now. And I think that will just push for newer technologies or different approaches. I don't know what those will be. Um, Gene therapy doesn't apply to everything, and there, I think it's bringing up things like other ways to modify gene expression or uh, the protein translation and the protein folding, and there's other ways. Um,
Mhm.
I don't think it's an easy answer, and I think it's an active part of the industry debate right now. It's happening. You're seeing companies stop development of gene therapies in some cases. You're seeing some go further into uh, particular types of gene therapy. So it really depends on the individual situation, I think.
Yeah. I don't have too much to add to that, and I'm a little more far removed from the clinical trial space, but I will say I think also like as patients, as you're treating more patients and more treatments are becoming available, I think thinking about combination therapies and trials will probably become more prevalent than they are now, especially because when you're thinking about clinical trials, it's hard to assess if someone's taking one drug and then another one, like what is actually making a difference. But I think as more treatments are becoming more available, we'll start seeing more combination therapy trials, and that's just going to be the way that it is. So,
So we already started to touch upon my next question, but what are those barriers for getting treatments to the rare disease patients? And I start Sam, like, what do you think is the biggest barrier today for getting patients even either into trials or an approved therapy?
there's a lot of factors, right? I mean, some of it is like knowledge or like a knowledge gap there of them not knowing that clinical trials are where could be where they live. A lot of patients are in areas that maybe don't have the like best medical care or the closest doctor office is an hour away. Especially for like in rare disease, like we said, a lot of them are pediatric patients, and so parents have to take time off of work and take their kids to clinical trials. So I think it's a lot more than getting to, a lot more goes into it because you're considering parents having to take time off and then having to pay like gas money, hotel, food for staying an X amount of time. So I think that's one of the biggest barriers is thinking about what it costs for a family to put their kid into a clinical trial. And I think another challenge is also um, making, I don't want to say like a reality check to parents, but a lot of, if you think about it, when you're a parent who has a child with a rare disease and you don't have a treatment or a cure and you're in a clinical trial, trying to switch that mindset of like this is a cure and a treatment and that it's just an option to help, ease symptoms and it's not a cure. And I think that's also one of the biggest challenges too, is just kind of setting expectations and then, also meeting the patients where they're at.
Hmm. Those are really exceptional points. And I would say what Samantha said earlier, diagnosis. Like all of it starts from diagnosis, even being part of the patient group to begin with when there's no treatment, or gathering enough patients to start raising awareness for research. I think that's one. And then when you get close and there's actually potential clinical trial being diagnosed, um, you probably have all been onto some rare disease discussion. You cannot go through one without someone saying diagnostic odyssey. So
Mhm.
we'll say it.
Yeah.
And it's real. There are changing the time to diagnosis is probably the biggest challenge that anyone endeavoring to make an improvement for the disease goes through. So that's one. And it's interesting you brought up the like all the effort that a family might have to go into to be part of a trial, especially when the trial there may only be a very few number of sites, and traveling. I was part of one study when I was working on Brineura before it was approved, and there was, I think, out of 23 patients in the trial, there was only two that didn't move, like literally move country or move major city, some fairly substantial move to make it happen. And we also had this interesting advisory board with families, a small number of families that were well before the trial started, when we were thinking about what the trial was going to be like. And these trials they have a lot of things involved. This was a neurologic disease. It was talking about CSF sampling. It was neurosurgery. There were neurodevelopment assessments regularly. There were MRIs. There was a lot of things for these kids. And I found it really interesting, not just the energy they would have to put in and the hope and expectations, like Sam said, those are very important. It was very interesting to see there was two families there that had a child around the same age and around the same kind of clinical status. And to hear both of them talk about, they hear about what the trial might look like. And one family saying, when do we sign up? We want to be part of it. We're ready. Where do we go next? And another family saying, I'm not sure. We don't know what that will look like. We might only have a year or two with our kid. I don't know that I want to spend it in a trial. Both valid points. And it's an individual decision. It's an individual aspect, but I think knowing what's meaningful, what's important, you will find people who want to participate. And working with the patient groups, working with the trial sites, a lot of these trial sites are really good at accommodating the patients and their families. Not all of them, but a lot of them are very good. And so I think there's, barriers to that is also you need money, because then you could have more sites, like more investment. But you have to balance that too. Like opening more sites costs money, and does it really get you more faster enrollment? Maybe, maybe not. I think it depends on the situation. Depends on the treatment too. A treatment that's an oral or a weekly infusion or injection is different than something that's a one time, or something that requires a surgery, or it's really depends on what the situation is.
Yeah, I think thank you for mentioning the diagnostic odyssey. I'm surprised it has taken 30 minutes for that term to come up in our discussion. So we've had kind of a discussion that's very US centric a little bit, just thinking about our healthcare system and how trials work in the United States. Can both of you talk about how we should try to address disparities in access to treatment, especially globally, in countries that don't have the same level of bioscience innovation to make sure that these are available to all the patients that might need to be first diagnosed and then treated?
Yeah, so I think the bigger issue, not necessarily that other countries don't have as great a bio innovation as we do. It's more of they have more stringent regulatory authorities that make it a lot harder to get anything passed and approved. And we think that our regulatory process is long and hard, which it is. But for example, like France has even harder, it's even harder for a drug to get approved in France. Um, so I think one is just understanding what each country's regulatory requirements are and having like someone on the ground there running. I mean, especially like the company I currently work for, we're trying to expand globally, and it just, having to each country has its own specific requirements and might be a little bit different than ours, and then also trying to figure out pricing for how to price a drug is also a consideration because it's different for the US versus on a country to country basis. So um, I think that's like one of the biggest things to consider in getting treatments to other countries.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And it's not one thing. The if you're thinking about trials in particular, there are some countries that have regulation that if you run a trial, then the people on the trial have free drug for life. But that's part of the requirement. So that is a calculation and a thoughtful consideration if you're a sponsor that you have to think about. Some places have a more infrastructure for clinical trials. Most countries have places that are capable of running clinical trials. Whether they centralize their patients really helps a lot. Sometimes European sites and other countries are better for trials because they funnel all patients to expert centers or specialty centers. So anyone with a metabolic disease is going to go to one of a few centers in that country. So they're concentrating the patients. So I definitely think that's an aspect. Some countries have a different philosophy about healthcare also. And that I think the US philosophy generally is do whatever it takes for the most part. It's not 100% that way in all situations, but it's kind of the mentality. In some other countries, there is a little bit more balance of kind of the best for everyone and the best for the individual and balancing those. And then for commercial drugs, that's a whole different story. And I worked on some products at BioMarin that were commercial for many years, and there were more than one of those that the US was not the number one in sales because there were more patients in other countries. So it's not a hard and fast rule that the US is the fastest and the best for the market. And commercially, there is as many rules as there are countries, but they do fall into categories. And in reality, the US is the strange one in healthcare payments and how drugs are priced and paid for. The US is unusual. The others are more similar to each other. And then a lot of it comes into play for rare disease, what the government can accommodate. I think often of Australia, and I like to give that example for people that are unfamiliar with rare disease, that Australia sets like a budget line item for rare diseases, and there's an amount, and then there's a little committee or some body that decides which ones are getting treated, but they only have so much money for rare diseases. And they specify how much that is, and then they figure out how to spend that. but they only have that much. And then there's other countries where it's a one-by-one patient. And there's just every variety of possibility. And there's innovation to be had there as well. I think that's some of the companies that have been in the commercial space for a long time they forged the reg path, they're forging the commercial path also.
So you spoke about innovations to be had. I think all of us hear about AI pretty much in the news every day. So maybe starting with you, Sam, what role do you think AI is going to play in helping to accelerate the access of treatments to patients?
I mean, I think it'll play more of a role in terms of like the data analysis piece when it comes to clinical trials. And yeah, I mean, AI will play a big role, I think, but it'll be interesting to see how it'll be used in clinical trials and healthcare. I know a lot of, at least now, like doctors are using it to transcribe their notes. So it'll be interesting to see kind of right now, I feel like it's not necessarily, I'm not saying unregulated, but there's no really like laws or rules. And it'll be interesting to kind of see, I think, like how doctors and even like companies and clinical trials will be able to use it moving forward. But I think it would definitely help speed along some of the processes when it comes to clinical trials, at least like early development in like phase one, phase two studies.
Are
Same
we
question to you,
talking
Tom.
like practical right now things or dream what is possible in the
Well,
future?
why don't we start with practical right now, and then we can talk about dreaming of the future.
Yeah, I agree with Sam. I think there is some things like imaging and really high content readouts that maybe there's a way to use AI that can maybe be more effective than something more than, oh, a radiologist read it and scored it a 3 instead of a 4, kind of thing where it could be more precise, like volumes of a tumor or volumes of a certain part of the brain, and really good at that kind of thing. Also, I think in some of the patient reported outcomes, we have these long questionnaire things that come out that do get to the points, but they're not really that efficient at doing that. If they're, and I'm not sure how you would get the input, but getting more patient specific, track what they're doing every day and make sense of that. I think that could be really useful. That's probably a future dreaming a little, but it feels very close. It feels like there's companies saying they can predict what we do and how we're doing it. So why not apply it in that way? I could see it. But I do think the dreaming way is really be able to pick out the differential diagnosis and really narrow things down, not based on a doctor sees and orders a battery of tests, but like, oh, you did this one test over here, you did a different test over there, and you started buying more of this type of support product. Like that tells me that you're needing more support in your kidney function. I don't know how that works, but that it pieces together really disparate information to put it together as a pattern. I am not convinced that rare disease will be the first place that shows up because it's smaller, it's a smaller sample. And you have to be identified and say, yes, I have this mutation of this disease, and I know that, and I've known that for a long time, and you've been tracking all these bits of data. I think it's hard to imagine. So I think it's much more on the research front and on the analysis front. I do see good promise in some of these more like make sense of these tracking movement and images and maybe even video and be able to make sense of it and make some conclusions from it.
Yeah, I also added, I think I hope AI will also help shrink that diagnostic odyssey by doing some of that like automated pattern recognition and, flagging which patients should be sent for whole genome sequencing or just like seeing that, yes, you have the horses and ponies kind of diagnosis with this set of phenotypes, but also have you considered the zebra? Is there a rare disease that also fits the same pattern that maybe it doesn't completely change the course of treatment, but perhaps in the future, the EHR will be the one to tell the doctor, like, hey, maybe you could look at this and prompt a just a check for more of these rare diseases, especially as we learn more about what their true incidence rates are. As we have more and more sequencing, maybe some of these things aren't nearly as rare as we thought they were. They're just not diagnosed as much as they should be. So I have some hope for AI in that space as well. Um, so shifting gears a little bit, we are going to go to Q&A in the audience in just a moment. So if you have a question, kind of think about it and get ready to write it in the chat. But I would like to ask a question more for our students who are on the call, thinking about how they want to approach their careers. So maybe Sam, you could start with how, as an early career person, can you get involved with the advocacy angle of working in rare disease?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things, at least like for me, and you're still in school, is joining club. Like for example, at KGI, there's the NORD Students for Rare chapter. I think that was a big part of kind of inserting and meeting patients and meeting other companies and going to conferences, and just talking to people about like patient advocacy and what's available. Because I know for me, I mean, it's very fitting. I wasn't sure how to even get into the space, and even after graduating, I started as a contract worker at Sarepta. And so I think even then, like, don't be discouraged, even if it's not a full-time role. Try to get any sort of experience. So I did that. And then I even was doing the Tango 2, working for Tango 2, also part-time. And that was just like a part-time thing as a research project coordinator. And it's really about who you like making connections. I will say, like, if you can meet as many people as you can in school, whether it's someone from a rare disease organization or a pharmaceutical company. I mean, it is small, but it's also not that small. People kind of know each other, and that's how I was able to get the role at Tango too. I had interviewed for a different position at another rare disease nonprofit, and the people at Tango 2 were looking for someone and they knew that and they recommended me, and that's kind of how it is. So it's really about making connections and who you know, and don't get discouraged. I'd also reach out to like alumni like myself or Tom, or like if you're looking for careers at a company and seeing someone's in a position that might be interesting to you, don't be afraid to reach out. People are more than happy and willing to kind of pass their knowledge on and help you, especially in your early career. So don't be afraid to reach out and make connections. It's all about, I think, who you know, and especially in this world of trying to find jobs, it makes a difference when you have a personal connection with people in the industry.
And Tom, what is your advice for our students who are hoping to stay in this rare disease space?
What I've seen is companies either focus on rare disease or they don't. So I think it actually makes it relatively straightforward to, if that's something you're interested in, to focus there. When it comes to research, you pick labs that have that focus on that. I agree with what Sam said, is all the same networking principles apply. And I think now there's a lot more choices, if that is something of interest to you, and there's more opportunities to focus on that. I mean, I have more experience, as you said. I liked that you put it that way. In 2004, there weren't this long list of rare disease companies. There was a dozen or so. Like it was not as prolific. The other thing I would think is all experience, it doesn't all have to happen at once. Let's put it that way. So you could get, if you're interested in one aspect of biotech, start following that and keep your eyes open for opportunities that might have a rare angle to them. It doesn't all have to happen right away. And I think the same applies whether you're going to devices or research or in vitro diagnostics or any other of those. It's the same idea is you can start in one place and start steering towards the other. It's like steering on skis more than it is steering on like a car. Like it's more gradual. Maybe it's sailing. I don't know. I'm not the best sports analogy, but gentle turns can happen, even if the first place you land is not the ideal of what you're looking for.
Thank you. Well, now we do have about 10 minutes for questions from our audience. So if you would like to ask a question, you can raise your digital hand and we can unmute you, or you can put it into the chat and I will read it for the group. And let me make sure I can see people's little digital hands here if I do get a question from the group. Well, I'll ask one while we're composing our questions. This is a question that I've been thinking about a lot, and that's just the role of genomics and how it has sort of changed how we think about rare disease and rare disease trials. And again, we've kind of, for some conditions, we've been able to shrink that diagnostic odyssey, even diagnosing newborns. With things that in the past would have been maybe several years till we had diagnosis. So we have a treatment window for some conditions that we never had in the past. But that means we're doing gene therapies on people who are not yet symptomatic. And so what would how do you think about that sort of risk reward for someone who has a diagnosis based on information, but not on yet manifestation of that, and taking on something like a gene therapy that is not 100%, like we don't know the long-term what the long-term consequences of that are going to be. We also know there are some, unfortunately, some children that have died in these trials. So what do you think about that as we design these and offer these to families, which was something that was not happening very few years ago? And maybe I'll start with Tom for this.
I think that a lot of personal opinion comes into this because I'm a scientist, so I want to know those things. I understand there are people who say, knowing a genetic diagnosis without having anything to do about it has consequences to it. And I agree with that. And I can see that perspective. I've also myself, I'd want to know. But I've learned from patient groups and parents that I've talked to that have children with some of these diseases, that the knowing gives them so much more opportunity to participate in, communities that understand what they're going through, to know what to expect, to be able to plan ahead, to be able to look elsewhere in their family. And so I think there's a huge benefit there. And I actually think it's something I learned from working in rare disease that I would apply across your life. If you're facing something that you don't have any experience with, find other people that have the experience. And that is whether you get a diagnosis you've never heard of, or if you're trying to solve a problem elsewhere in your life. I think that's good advice. But it gives the opportunity that you have more information. You can start carving out these patient groups that are more similar. I went to an interesting talk maybe 6 years ago. That was the American Epilepsy Society or the European, one of the two. It was a neurology focus, and they were redefining how epilepsies were classified based on genetics. They were saying all the past was symptomology and describing what kinds of seizure, to shift to the genetic diagnosis. And I think a lot of specialties are shifting that way because it makes more sense and it actually leads to more consistent research and more consistent management and all those things. So I think in that way, it helps all us apply what we know better.
Right. Sam, I don't know if you have anything to add
No,
to
I
that.
was gonna say Tom, I think said it pretty well. I think just having that knowledge really just gives people like the empowerment to make a decision whether they want to act on it or not. And I think like a big thing, like he was saying, is community, right? Like for example, Tango 2 is relatively new. The gene was discovered in 2018, and it's like small population, but even then, like their group, they have a Facebook group and they're always posting, and it's just like that community connection. So even though there's no clinical trial or treatment for them right now, they take like vitamin B supplements and hope that like it tends to help. But for them, they don't have a trial, and so even though they know that they have this disease, they at least feel a little bit more less alone. They have a community, and so and everything that Tom said. So
Mhm. So we do have a few questions in the chat now, and I'll start with one from our new genetic counseling program director. And I think this question is, I guess, for both of you. Can you comment on the concept of having clinic approved therapies that are based on just like a method and approach, but where every gene target would be unique to the patient? Versus having an exact product that gets approved and then gets applied to multiple patients, and just kind of some of the regulatory hurdles that those approach-based trials take.
I've not worked on any of those. Sounds more challenging, sounds interesting. Um, and I think that's where the ultra rare has to go. We have to figure it out. I don't think people have figured it all out yet. I think it's in the midst of being figured out, and it seems like the way to go. It makes the most sense.
yeah, I mean, it's also money, right? So, I mean, there is an organization that specifically treats ultra rare diseases, and Lorem. They're based out in Carlsbad, and they specifically create treatments just for the N of one. So it can be done, but it's expensive. And I mean, that's just going towards like personalized medicine and treatment that, hopefully we get to as a society. But yeah, it's kind of hard. I think it's hard to. It's I think it's mostly about the money, right? Like your return. And that's like the biggest, unfortunately, driving factor, especially for like these pharmaceutical companies that are making these treatments is it worth making a treatment for one person?
But I
Yeah.
think there are examples.
Yeah.
The cell therapy, ex vivo cell therapy, they're working and they're finding a development model and a commercial model to make that happen. Cancer is probably that's where it's going to get figured out first. That's my feeling.
So another question from the chat. How do you think that the rare disease space is changing as whole genome sequencing becomes both faster and cheaper and just more accessible for all patients? I'll put it
So
to Sam.
you,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm just, sorry, just like, thinking
that's
about
okay.
what I want to say. I mean, I think it's gonna, the rare disease space, I mean, even though it is rare, a lot of these rare diseases won't really be considered rare because the amount of people that'll be diagnosed. I mean, I think that's really why right now it's called rare disease, because we think that there's only so many people, but a lot of people just aren't diagnosed. So I think we'll see more and more people get diagnosed with what diseases were once called rare disease, and hopefully that helps, create the bigger community and enough data to get clinical trials happening and a treatment coming out for these different genetic disorders.
Okay, great answer. I'm also, just because we have a lot flying in
Yeah.
now, well, what are some other advocacy and educational outreach groups you would suggest in addition to NORD?
As a general
Yeah, I
point,
was going to ask, is it general? I mean, there's a lot of organizations. So generally, I mean, I think NORD is good. There's Every Life Foundation. Um, there's another one that I'm blanking on, but yeah, there's just many. It also depends on if you're looking specifically, there's there's a ton out there.
And I know one person who started an organization for professional patient advocates called PPALs. It's like a training program, and they do you attend like a summit and you get to know people who've done that as a career. If you're really interested in patient advocacy in particular, um, yeah.
Great. Speaking of talking to patient groups, um, several times it's come up that knowledge gap and the science. And I once, there was a headline, I think, in the New York Times, right? If it's like, if you want to know the most about a disease, ask a rare disease patient parent. Like that, there is that huge learning curve when someone gets diagnosed and trying to learn everything they can about a condition. So, what are some strategies that can be helpful to families as they navigate a new diagnosis and this whole space of like, do you go to the clinical trial? Do you try to go with an existing treatment, standard of care? How these terms, how do we translate that into a way that doesn't overwhelm these families?
Well, I mean, I think the best person to talk to would be their genetic counselor because they're trained, right, to talk about these hard things. But I think the other thing to think about is just that using more layman's terms, right? I mean, there's a lot of these like scientific terms, but really they can be broken down into more simple terms that like everyday people understand. And sometimes I think it's considering like thinking about their background. So when you're describing something, you could also use, I don't know, examples that or metaphors that they might better understand. So just kind of thinking about, the person you're talking to, their background and using words that, you know, they would probably easier understand just to make it feel less overwhelming.
My experience has been less on communicating about the disease and more about communicating about the drug developments
Mhm.
process, which takes just as much care and explanation. And I think a big part is um, being transparent as much as you can to build that trust that when you tell them this is how trials run or this is how we're doing things differently than typical trials and why, that they understand and believe you. And then you give them time to ask questions because they will have them and it might take them a bit to get there. The idea to not overwhelm them, um, I would say most families that are, especially a very serious rare disease, uh, they're they know they've already dealt with a lot of overwhelming. So it I think you can't shy away from it being a lot of information. You just have to be uh, as clear as you can and help. A lot of it is getting the community on board. A lot of times it's not you directly, it's sharing that with partnering with the patient groups. They can help make sense of this. They have scientific advisory boards that do exactly that, is translate this stuff. People like us from KGI are exceptional translators and don't underestimate how powerful that is. I think we forget sometimes when we're in our little bubble that we go out, we're really good about talking about science because we've learned how to do it. So I think leaning back on that and that people can understand these complex
Mhm.
concepts, you just got to meet them where they are.
Excellent. All right, so we do just have 1 minute left. So maybe as a final remark, we'll start with you, Sam. What do you find the most challenging and also the most rewarding about working in rare disease therapeutics?
I think the most challenging thing is just hearing what the patients have gone through to get to their diagnosis and how often they've been dismissed or told them it's nothing. And so I think that's the most challenging thing, just from like a human perspective, that they've gone through so much. And what's most rewarding is just being that person for them, that they finally feel heard and that you're making a difference and that they have a partner and they feel like they're supported. And I think so just being able to be there and supporting the patients is the most rewarding thing for me.
Mhm. For me personally, the most challenging is usually knowing we're pulling as many levers to go as fast as we can, and it's not fast enough, and you have to live with that. Um, and then the rewarding part is that you really are impacting, you really are changing the world for this group of people. Uh, and and that goes whether the technology, the research, the trial, whatever, whether it works or not, it's moving things in the right way and trying, and the effort is, I think, appreciated. So that's very rewarding to try to tackle problems that don't have solutions yet. That's pretty rewarding.
Well, thank you to both of our speakers for sharing your insights, and thank you to our audience for participating with your wonderful questions at the end. And I will turn it back over to Dan for a last wrap up of this event.
Yeah, thanks so much. That was a really excellent conversation and some good insights and connecting it back to the KGI experience. And so, we want this to be a network for people to continue to reach back to. So tonight kind of helped with that. So thank you, everybody. Don't be afraid to go online and LinkedIn and connect with these grads as well, knowing that many of the people in the call are also interested in these topics. Continue to build your network along that front. Thanks to Dr. Fortini and everybody else, and we'll see you the next time at the Beaker Speakers.